Why some people don't have an inner monologue. Do you guys have an inner monologue? Yes or no? Can you hear yourself in your head? Most people can, some people can't. Let's find out why. This seems like some shit I'd watch in a fucking high school biology class.
Maybe it shouldn't be surprising that writers
Oh my god, it's the green guy.
give so many superheroes, alien beings, and magical creatures the power of telepathy. Just imagine what you could learn about a person if you could hear their thoughts. Well, actually, I've just made a bit
Are we in school right now? Leave, bitch. I want to learn what the fuck Hank Green or John Green gotta tell me.
Because not everyone has that kind of internal monologue, or what psychologists often refer to as inner speech. And even
But how do you not develop that? Like, that's what I don't get. Because you just presume that people think the same way you do. And obviously, like, people have different opinions and different thought processes. But, like, I always presumed that at the end of the day, everybody had some sort of speech within their head until, like, fairly recently when I found out otherwise. It's just it's crazy to think that, like, you just don't, some people have the inability to think in their own head. Or it's basically just talking outwardly, but not using speech.
people who do hear their thoughts don't necessarily talk in their heads 24/7. It turns out that inner speech could tell us a lot about how our brains work, how they develop, and how we speak. But research on all of this is really
Well, and when you're talking out loud, you rarely speak within your own head, right? Like, obviously, if I force myself to, I can have thoughts in my head while I'm speaking currently to you guys. But for the most part, when you're having a conversation with someone, the thoughts move from in your head to out of your mouth, right? You're still processing them similarly to how you would in your head, but you're just speaking outwardly instead of inwardly. But you usually don't ever do both at once.
Inner speech is somewhat loosely defined as when a person speaks meaningful thoughts without producing sound or moving any part of their body, like their tongue or their lips. So in some ways, it's easier to define by what it isn't. It's different from visualizing or picturing things in your head, and it does not include feelings like happiness
Well,
or
that's imagery, and then that's emotion. There's different types of, like, thinking that you can do.
hunger, or your awareness of sensory experiences like noticing the glint of something shiny on the ground. So basically, it only refers to
Do you ever have a political argument in your head but don't have the courage to say it to a real person? But you're talking to somebody that actively speaks about how they've shit themselves on stream. If I'm thinking it, probably gonna say it, right?
thoughts accompanied by specific words. These words usually have the same tone, inflection, and even accent that they would if they were spoken aloud, though not always, which
But you can make yourself think in a different accent too. Right now, I just sounded like Obama inside of my head. And then I just sung Till I Collapse by Eminem in Eminem's voice in my head. I don't know how the fuck I'd do that.
even figuring that much out about inner speech was somewhat of a challenge for psychologists because, surprise, it's really hard to measure people's internal experiences. So there's been a lot of variation in research methods and not a lot of agreement between different studies and different scientists. For example, some studies have tried to see inside people's heads by prompting them to hear specific words or phrases in their mind, like by asking them to read something silently or determine if two words rhyme without saying them out loud. That's revealed
Some people can't do that. Like, there's some people that would go, like, if I was like, if I wrote out, do red and bed rhyme, they would have to say them out loud to fucking know. There's no way.
some weird quirks about inner speech, like that when people read,
Is your brain you? I would say so. Yeah, for the most part. Some people would disagree, but I think your brain isn't you. Your brain is a part of you. But the you that you recognize as you is your consciousness, which is a part of your brain. So your brain isn't fully you, but what you would recognize as you is only your brain, which is why I believe that your body really, if you were capable to move your just brain and maybe your eyeballs outwardly and then give yourself some sort of sensation like you're in a real body, it would feel the same. Right, like your actual body isn't relative to your brain. Your brain as an organ is the most fucking important thing in terms of like keeping a sense of self or just functioning as a fucking human. Every other part of your body can die and be pumped and worked by machines, but the second like your brain dies, you're dead. Except the heart. Not even the heart. You have pacemakers and you have things that can manually pump your heart for you. Your body can die and you could still be there mentally and feel like you. But the second your brain's gone, you're just dead.
But prompted inner speech and spontaneous inner speech aren't really the same. Plus, prompts can't tell us much about how frequently or why people use inner speech in their daily life. So
I don't listen to music in the car unless I'm with other people usually. Or if I'm like really in the mood to listen to music. Most long car drives, I'm just dead silence talking to myself the whole time. It doesn't even matter. Like I've been on like 2-hour car drives, did not listen to music once. Just talk to myself. Bro said, what about just random shit? I just have a conversation with myself. It's not like I'm two different people, but I'm just basically asking myself questions that I then answer or just think about. That's boring as fuck. Maybe you got a boring-ass consciousness. You ever think about that? Johnny S. Papa? You ever think about that? When I listen to music, I also daydream with my eyes open. Like right now, I'm looking at myself on my fucking left monitor and what you guys are saying in chat, but I'm not processing what I'm looking at. My eyes aren't moving. I'm thinking of me fighting a battle as a gladiator to the death. And I have the power of a katana. And it's really sharp and on fire now, and I'm using it to cut the guy up. And I won the battle. I just won a gladiator match in my own head. Anyways, that's what I do if I listen to music. Especially if I listen to some funk shit. Like if I'm listening to some funk music or rave shit, bitch, I'm putting myself in death matches. Swear to God. Swear to God, I don't even care, bro. I'm putting myself in some fucking crazy shit. Some World War Z-esque stuff, bro. I'll imagine myself with a border collie like I'm in the fucking Fallout show.
Most of the time, our inner speech consists of negative things about ourselves, our negative emotions, or us trying to decide if we're good enough. And weirdly enough, that is all usually in full sentences. Only about 1/3 of people experience abbreviated inner speech, where a single word or phrase represents an entire complex thought. So the opposite of what happens when we read. Questionnaires have also tried to get to the question of how often people engage in inner speech, but they have a few limitations. Perhaps the most glaring is that people generally aren't great at being aware of their inner experiences.
Yeah, you're not tracking the percentage of your day that you're spending fucking listening to yourself.
So questionnaires probably overestimate the frequency of inner speech. More recently, researchers have started using a procedure called descriptive experience sampling, or DES, instead. With DES, people carry a beeper that goes off randomly throughout the day, and when it does, they write down some notes about exactly what was going on in their head at that moment. It's like when you're
and you could write nothing.
Sitting across from your friend and you're like, what you thinking about? It's not perfect. Some researchers
do that. It's so interesting. Because sometimes your friend will just say, what do you mean? Like, what? And that's when I'm, like, tripped out. And I start thinking my friends aren't real. Because, like, just randomly walk up to your friend and be like, punch him. What you thinking about? What do you mean? What were you just thinking about? And usually they have to think about it for a second because they just got so distracted. But, like, most of the time they'll answer it, but it'll be, like, some random shit. You know, I was thinking about what I was going to eat later.
But it is giving scientists a better sense of how many people hear their thoughts and how often. And it is revealed that inner monologues, like most things in psychology, are on a spectrum. Very few people have no inner speech at all, and very few people engage in it 100% of the time. DES studies suggest that 70 to 85% of people experience some kind of spontaneous inner speech at least occasionally.
But that means almost 1/3 of people don't. And of those people, most of them are talking to themselves about 15 to 30% of the time. If I'm not actively speaking, I'm probably thinking in my own head about something.
About 75% of people report that sometimes they're having back and forths in their head. They usually play both parts in the conversation, though. Only about 25% of people report that other people show up in their inner
I don't have anybody else talk to me in my head.
Speech. People who have ever had an imaginary friend are more likely to use this kind of dialogue.
That's what somebody said earlier in the stream. They said they have a conversation with themselves, but they put like a rat or a mouse as that person.
Others might experience something a little different but similar, what psychologists call imagined interactions. Basically, that's when you imagine all the things you should.
But that's That's so weird though, because if you don't have an inner monologue at all, I don't want to be mean to those people, but who do you perceive yourself as? My inner monologue is me, right? The me that's talking right now is still me. But like when I'm thinking back about like me as a person, I'm like the perceivable me is the person in my head. So if you don't have a person in your head, who's you? Does that make sense, chat? I don't know.
What's not clear in all of this is why people have these different inner monologues or dialogues and what those differences say about them. We don't even really know where inner speech comes from. From an evolutionary standpoint, many experts think that inner speech came about as part of the process for generating overt speech. It may even be a side effect of sorts of spoken language that's been co-opted.
Stop. Don't call it a side effect, because then it makes it seem like we're not even fucking here. Holy fuck, dude. It's a side effect of spoken language. Yeah, like maybe repeated processing in your own head to try and learn how to speak a language better to communicate with others, and then you end up just communicating with yourself because you realize you can learn language from other people and learn things from other people, so then you can just do the same by questioning yourself. That's literally reasoning.
For other cognitive tasks. See, when you go to speak, your brain simultaneously sends signals to two different areas. One to motor parts of your brain to control the mouth and the tongue and stuff, and a copy to the sensory parts of the brain. The sensory signal allows the brain to make a prediction about what it's about to hear. Essentially, you recite the words in your head as you say them out loud. And it turns out that the same kind of signal occurs during inner speech. That may be why you can, quote, hear yourself. You're literally activating the hearing part of your brain. And some
yeah, dude! It's like a fake, you're fake. Oh my god, so then what do deaf people do? Well, they would see it. I'm assuming they would see, would they see like Braille or something written? Sign language? You think they see, but it would be seen sign language. So they would use visual like imagery to kind of show their thoughts in their head. Wow, that would be so different. They would see the signs. Or not Braille. What am I saying? Braille's for blind people. So then what do blind people... Well, blind people, when they think, it would be in their head, obviously, just like speech, because they can hear. What am I saying? Braille, dude. But Braille for blind people, how would they imagine things? Well, they can't. But they could just imagine thoughts. But that would be similar to just inner speech. But they would probably play the experience back in some sort of different way in their head that's different from just inner speech.
There are cases of people with brain damage who lose their inner speech, but not the ability to talk, and vice versa. Still, inner speech could have helped people communicate better, which could explain why it evolved. This is just the prevailing hypothesis, though, and it's possible it's wrong. Also, it's likely that even if inner speech started this way, the brain has repurposed it for other uses. Those other uses might explain why it differs between people. Some psychologists think our everyday inner speech reflects conversations that we had out loud as kids, especially moments when our caregivers talked us through solving a problem or calmed us down. The idea is that these teaching moments get internalized as we grow up, and then we essentially replay them in our heads later, which would explain why inner speech often resembles a conversation. And this could explain why, content-wise, it's often about self-regulation, things like problem solving, planning things out, time management, and motivation. Those are all things someone would help talk their young child through. Plus, the same brain areas are...
Oh my god, you're like parenting yourself. You're like parenting yourself. Like you're or like coaching yourself. Like I immediately thought of like at the gym, if you're doing like cardio and you're like, fuck dude, like 10 more seconds, you'll say that in your head. But like that would just be the equivalent of what somebody else would say to you.
Activated during internal dialogic speech and when a person is thinking about someone else's experience and perspective. That would make sense if the voice in your head is basically your brain recycling someone else's words. So if this theory is correct, inner speech might be different between people simply because their upbringings and social interactions were different. We still don't know...
Is consciousness possible without language? I say no. I've talked about that on stream before, but I think the only reason you are conscious is because you had the capability to speak. If you weren't able to put thoughts into words, you wouldn't be conscious because you wouldn't have an inner monologue. Your inner monologue would only exist in emotions and imagery. You wouldn't be able to speak to yourself And if you're not able to speak to yourself, then you're more an observer than the initiator.
But there are some big clues that inner speech plays an important role in cognition. So, all those brain processes involved in thinking. For instance, scientists have used a test called a dual task paradigm to see how inner speech affects problem solving. Basically, they ask a person to solve a problem while
Okay, yeah, I'm losing it. Why is this making you lose it?
doing something else. And if that second task is physical, like tapping
I say that, but the first time I thought about this, I remember I, like, freaked out. Like, I'm used to it now. Like, just thinking about, like, damn, dude, like, am I even real? Like, fuck, dude. Do you think Daisy talks about you in your own head? In her head? No. I always wonder what my dog thinks, though. And when they have dreams, I always wonder, like, because my dog will, like, dream and kick in her dream, and I'm like, damn, dude. Like, she's imagining something. I don't know what it is. And I wonder how she perceives me. Right. Something I think about a lot is if I didn't win the race as a sperm, would it be my consciousness be in another body? I was literally thinking about that at the gym today. Or would I be myself, not exist at all? I believe, I was thinking about this in terms with crows. I always was like, damn, what if I was a crow? Well, then I wouldn't be me, and then I wouldn't exist. The only you that exists is the you that is now in the exact bodily form that you are and the exact experiences that you had. But then, what if you were still born by the same parents, you were a different sperm, and you lived the same exact life you live now? Would the you that exists now exist in that universe? No. I'm not saying, I think, but there has to be a level of what that is, right? Like, what if one cell in my body didn't divide the way it did? I would still be me, right? But when does it not be me? When am I not me, right? If that one sperm still, you know, was different, but I lived the exact life I live now, and there was just I said the same name, and I was Joe, but I looked different, right? And I was different. I had different genetics. Would that be me? It would be a very similar consciousness. They would think exactly how I would. It would basically be a clone, mentally, not physically. It would be a mental clone of me, but it still wouldn't be me.
Inner speech may also be an important tool for memory, and more specifically, working memory. That's the memory where you store the information you want to access really quickly. One of the components in working memory is the ability to repeat information to yourself until you no longer need it, and for that, you need inner speech. In fact, people who do more self-managing
like studying, I always talk to myself in my head. That's what I don't understand. For inner speech, like if you're like reading quiz cards, maybe that's why some people suck at studying. Like, if I'm using a Quizlet and I'm learning terms, I'm just going to repeatedly say the term in my head fucking hundreds of times until I fucking get it.
Speech, so things like talking.
Like, I never study out loud either. That's probably how they would do it. They would talk. I'm assuming the people that don't have inner speech would maybe read it out loud and then say it out loud. But when I study, or when I used to study, I would fucking, because I just graduated, but I mean, I would in silence the whole time. I could have 100-term, 200-term Quizlet, and I would just sit there and do it on my computer, or my phone, or my fucking, you know, whatever. And I would just sit there in silence. I would never talk. I would never talk out loud if I was studying.
So differences in how people talk to themselves might underlie differences in how well they perform different kinds of thinking. Inner speech may also play a part in mental health conditions. Research has connected it to depression and anxiety, for example. People who have more depressive tendencies tend to experience more depressive self-talk. And we know that people who are more anxious tend to engage in more self-critical inner speech. And it's not clear if these negative forms of inner speech exacerbate or even cause those conditions, or if the conditions lead to higher amounts of negative inner speech. Those studies have found that if you ask people to think verbally about hypothetical situations, even positive ones, their mood is lower than if you ask them to picture the hypothetical situations instead. And that does support the idea that the speech part of inner speech might make people less happy for some reason. Other research has tied inner speech to symptoms common in psychotic disorders. For example, people with schizophrenia often report hearing voices of people speaking to them or telling them what to do. One theory is that those voices are actually inner speech. Remember that prediction signal I mentioned earlier? Well, some experts think that if something in that neural circuit is off, then the brain's usual way of identifying self-made sounds and thoughts could be off too. So basically, that person's brain might not be so great at separating sounds they generate from ones they hear. And that may mean that it also...
And yeah, no, that it's the equivalent of when you have a song stuck in your head and you can't make yourself not think about it. Right? Like, if I tell you don't think about squirrels, you're going to start thinking about squirrels. It's just like you have this weird input and you have no capability, like now you're just going to keep thinking about squirrels for the next 5 fucking minutes, and you're going to tell myself stop thinking about squirrels. Now you're going to start keep fucking thinking about squirrels, right? Like if you tell somebody to think about something, they'll get more off topic than if you tell them not to.
Because of these potentially important roles in cognition and mental health, psychologists are eager to gain a better understanding of what inner speech is and why it happens. And figuring all that out could tell us a lot about, well, a lot, from how our brains develop and work to what's actually happening in a variety of mental disorders. But as of right now, we just don't know that much about this thing. Most of us do every day. There are a lot of big questions currently unanswered, like where inner speech comes from, why it differs between people, and what those differences mean. Like, can you change your inner monologue? Can you train yourself to think in conversations or to hear other voices or your own more often? We don't even know if you should want to make those changes, if there are benefits or downsides of different kinds of inner speech. And it's probably going to be a while before we have any clear answers, because our methods for studying it just aren't great. And there's a lot of debate over basic questions like how many people even do it in the first place. In the meantime, though, you can still talk about it amongst yourself. Thanks to Eric for asking us about this topic, and to all of our—
Wow. That was a good fucking video. Psycho for the 5. You're incredibly fried. I'm not incredibly fried. Fuck off. Fuck off. Chat, we're calling it there. Ugh, I gotta eat.